I will be discussing the articles Small Change, Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted by Malcolm Gladwell, How K-pop Fans Are Weaponizing the Internet for Black Lives Matter by Aja Romano, and Social Media Helps Black Lives Matter Fight the Power by Bajan Stephen. All of these articles focus on the complex role of social media in activism and social justice movements. How K-pop Fans Are Weaponizing the Internet for Black Lives Matter by Aja Romano stresses how important and powerful social media is as a tool that can be utilized by activists who repurpose the technology to help their movements, much like Zuckerman's quote-unquote cute cat theory. Romano provides 4 examples of how the K-pop community has utilized, or as he calls it, weaponizes social media platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and more to support the Black Lives Matter movement. For example, the K-pop community shut down the Dallas Police Department's app that sought out information from the public during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 by submitting fan cam. This resulted in the app becoming overwhelmed and shutting down, preventing the police from seeing real tips regarding the protesters. Romano argues that the K-pop community is an example of the various ways in which activists can utilize these online apps, platforms, and communities for a greater purpose. Social Media Helps Black Lives Matter Fight the Power by Bajan Stephen argues that social media technology has provided activists and social justice movements with a platform to share information, educate others to change the dominant discourse, mobilize activist resources and bodies, and more to a widespread global audience. Stephen does this by outlining the history of the civil rights movement and discussing the movement's use of technology over time, from the use of phone lines in the 1960s up until today, where BLM activists use social media sites for the same purposes. Stephen argues that this change in technology that's available to activists has had a huge impact, resulting in real-life results. For example, how online activism has been used to get the Confederate flag removed from the South Carolina Capitol building. Contrary to the 2 other articles, Malcolm Gladwell's 2010 piece, Small Change, Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted, provides an opposing perspective. Gladwell argues that the only real and meaningful forms of activism are what he calls high-risk activism, which come from strong tie connections. These strong tie connections are the result of close interpersonal relationships between people who have a personal connection to the movement, like friends, family, classmates, and so on. Gladwell says that in contrast, social media platforms only facilitate these quote-unquote weak ties or distant connections, such as acquaintances or strangers, because despite interacting online, most have never met before. So, online social media-based activism is useful for the widespread sharing of information and helping shift the discourse surrounding numerous issues, but in Gladwell's opinion, it is not useful for implementing and facilitating this high-risk activism, this meaningful and systemic change. While I believe Gladwell has some valid points, especially with regards to the overwhelming amount of surface-level performative activism across social media, I argue that because Gladwell's article was written 13 years ago in 2010, before the COVID-19 pandemic that forced the entire world online, it is not completely accurate. Instead, I argue that social media is not entirely useless in activist movements. Rather, it is essential in this digital age, and it has numerous benefits. As noted by Perez Brummer et al., the waves of lockdown and enforced distancing at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in drastic shifts in how people interact with one another. There has been a drastic increase in the use of technology to connect with one another, as this has allowed individuals to connect regardless of their geographical constraints. Perez, Brummer et al. Stressed how this has resulted in cultural settings being moved into virtual spaces, such as virtual classrooms, workplaces, and places of worship, with the increased use of web conferencing software like Zoom. This means that people are not limited to having these weak tie connections online. Instead, many people have very strong tie connections with family, friends, classmates, co-workers, and so on that are fully based online. As Gladwell notes himself, there are strengths to these quote-unquote weak ties that are created online. People we do not know are our best source for new information and ideas. These people that we can connect with anywhere at any time online. And as we have seen since the beginning of the pandemic, people have sought out these strong and meaningful connections online. Text-based platforms like WhatsApp and social media outlets like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook are all being used by activists to connect, organize, spread information, collaborate, and make real changes. For example, Stephen noted how Black Lives Matter activists' work has resulted in the U.S. federal government investigating police practices and interactions in places like Baltimore and Ferguson. Gladwell also noted how, unlike a lot of this high-risk activism on social media is not based upon a hierarchical organization, and instead they are useful for building networks. While hierarchical organizations are ruled by a centralized authority who make decisions with and have various rules and policies, these vertical online-based networks are very resilient and highly adaptable as they make decisions through group consensus and have various opinions and ideas from many different parties from across the globe. For example, Romano discussed how the K-pop community overtook the White Lives Matter hashtag on Twitter by posting about music and fan cams to dilute and bury the hashtag's original racist intentions. Overall, Romano, Gladwell, and Stephen all make important points regarding the repurposing of social media technology by activists to foster social justice movements like Black Lives Matter. But many of Gladwell's critiques fall short because of its age. Today, many of these vertically organized networks online remain highly adaptable and resilient. And following the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, our world has become even more digitally focused, just as activists and these movements have become as well. Thank you.